I wanted to dive into a little about just the overall cost of the room, because I was looking into this and it kind of shocked me where the Niners are right now. They obviously signed Juwan Jennings, or they re-signed him. They tendered him the $4.9 million tender. So now he'll be on the roster. But the Niners have a big decision to make with Brandon Aiyuk. Right now, today, with Brandon Aiyuk being on a $14 million deal, his fifth-year option, the Niners they're looking at the second most expensive wide receiver room in the NFL right now. If they were
nearly 50 million, right?
right,
14, 28, and whatever you said, Juwan's getting 5.
yeah. If a reasonable deal right now for Brandon Aiyuk is $24 million. That would be a 4-year, $24 million deal would be about what Brandon Aiyuk deserves, what he'd get. That would put them at the high
24 million per year.
4-year, 24 million or what's the AYY or AAV. That would put them at 66, or that would put them at $61 million. That would be the highest in the NFL by $8 million. For a team that doesn't pass the ball that much. And if you include George Kittle in the mix, they're at $66 million right now, which is the second highest. And if they pay Aiyuk $24 million, they're looking at $76 million, which would be $13 million more than any other team in the NFL for the receiving group. So we're looking at a super expensive receiving group for a team that they throw the ball, but they're not. It's not the Patrick Mahomes offense. It's a run for scheme. So I guess the question is Aiyuk too rich for the 49ers to extend this season? And what would you do with Brandon Aiyuk?
Well, I mean, it's such a tough situation because you've already paid Debo. Now you've already paid JJ. He wants to wait for the market to kind of reveal itself. Wow. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what the answer is there. They're 32nd in the NFL in pass attempts. Are they really going to spend $50 million on Aiyuk? I think the Aiyuk thing is going to get too rich for their blood, and they're going to wind up trading him. That'll be my guess. And maybe doing an Armstead Buckner thing where they trade him and draft a receiver. I think it could happen. I love Aiyuk. I think he's terrific, but the guy had 3 catches in the Super Bowl, 3 catches in each playoff game. The wide receiver position is incredibly deep year after year in the draft. You can get some really good. It's not like they can't get a receiver. If they wound up with a mid-first round pick, they might be able to get a great receiver. I mean, do we know for sure that Brandon Aiyuk's going to be better than Brian Thomas or Xavier Legette or one of these? We don't know. I mean, who knows? I mean, maybe he is. Right now he is, but there's no guarantee that he for sure will be a great receiver. I mean, I'd rather see them sign him and move off of one of the other receivers,
right?
To be completely honest, but I don't think that's viable. I don't think that's possible.
No, I 100% agree. It's not Aiyuk. Aiyuk isn't the problem. It's not like, it's not like you're saying, I don't want Aiyuk anymore. Aiyuk is the guy that you want, but you can't get rid of Debo. Debo's money's not going anywhere. So the question really isn't, do you want to keep Aiyuk or not? I mean, I guess that is kind of the question. And I think what will really end up happening is that Aiyuk's just going to be on his 5th-year option this year, and they're going to wait to re-sign him until next year. But the real question is, if you're the 49ers, are you willing to pay $76 million for your receiving group? $76 million, $13 million more than any team in the NFL. That's ridiculous. That
doesn't make sense.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense.
That doesn't make sense.
Right.
But if you move Aiyuk the way you moved DeForest Buckner, you better make sure that the receiver you go for is not Kinlaw. Otherwise, you've hurt your football team dramatically. And if the Niners hurt their football team dramatically, they won't win a Super Bowl. Right. So they're not going that good. They're not going so good where they could hurt their team dramatically. And they took the Trey Lance bullet. They traded 3 picks for Lance. He wound up being a bust. They found Purdy, so they saved themselves, but they also lost, 3 first-round picks. Well, they found a way to kind of get by it. They didn't win the Super Bowl, but they found a way to still get to a Super Bowl. If they swing and miss on this Aiyuk thing and trade him for a pick, turn that pick into a player, that player becomes just an ordinary player. They've hurt themselves, and they probably have eliminated their chances of winning a Super Bowl in this run. So this is a very important move.
Right.
It's not like, oh, well, yeah, just move Aiyuk and just take whatever receivers on the board, and hopefully it'll be as good. It's like, no,
No,
you
I
better
know.
freaking know who you're going with. And I've done a deep dive on these receivers.
And
The
we'll
guys
get
who are
yeah.
the guys
Sorry.
who are in the first round are Brian Thomas from LSU, Keon Coleman from Florida State, Xavier Legette from South Carolina, Adonai Mitchell from Texas, Xavier Worthy from Texas, Malachi Corley from Western Kentucky. Those are the 6 half dozen receivers that they would be staring at most likely. I got to think Malik Neighbors and some of the other, the very top of the receiver core, Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, Rome Odunze. Those guys, probably going to, maybe you could throw Lad McConkey into that mix. If you really like Lad McConkey. I personally don't. I mean, that would be a huge, huge mistake if they traded Aiyuk for a pick and then took Lad McConkey.
Well, they're not even the same receiver. Lad McConkey's like a slot. He's an NFL slot receiver. He's an NFL.
He's not Aiyuk. He's not Aiyuk. Now,
Yeah,
Brian Tom and also, Troy Franklin from Oregon, not a big fan of his. Devontae Walker of North Carolina, not a big fan of his. Drops the ball a lot. Jalen Polk from Washington, not a big fan of his. So, it's like, there are there awesome receivers in this draft? Yeah, but there's also some bust receivers. So if you make that trade and draft a bust receiver, you're hurting yourself dramatically. You better know how many. You better know. Last year, for example, there were 6 receivers drafted in the first round, 7 in the second round. You had 13 wide receivers drafted in the first 2 rounds. If we went back and looked at last year's draft, I guarantee you that we would only take a couple of those receivers,
right?
Probably straight up.
No, the trade. The reason why the trade's being considered is because of the financial situation the 49ers in it. The 49ers are in. It's nothing to do with Brandon Aiyuk. The 49ers want to keep Brandon Aiyuk, but it's going to get expensive, and they're going to have to, they're going to have to figure this out. The problem with the trade is that it's just incredibly risky. It's such a risky move. But if you do it right, it's amazing because you get to kick the can on the money. You get a cheap player who can produce hopefully as much as Brandon Aiyuk for a fraction, like a real fraction of the cost, like only a few million versus 24. I mean, you're saving a ton of money. And if you go back and look at past trades, it's really boom or bust. It's like you look at AJ Brown when he left Tennessee to go to the Eagles. Tennessee was left with Treylon Burks in that trade, who's been a major bust, and now Tennessee is they're looking to rebuild. Well,
now they're paying wide receivers gobs of money,
right? So it's like they paid Calvin. It was Ridley.
Yeah, Ridley.
Yeah, they paid Ridley a fat amount of money, and then it's like you look at the Stephon Diggs trade where the Vikings traded him away. And no one ever talks about that because they used that pick to draft Justin Jefferson. So it's like it's really a boomer bust decision, and you better be damn sure.
You better hit.
You better hit.
You better hit. I mean,
it's for real going to blow up in your face.
Here are the receivers that went in the first 2 rounds last year. Marvin Mims went to Denver at the end of round 2. Pretty good receiver, but he's not Aiyuk. Rashee Rice went to Kansas City at 55.
I like
good
him.
receiver, but he's not Aiyuk. Jaden Reed went to the Packers at 50. Good receiver. I'd rather have Aiyuk. Jonathan Mingo went to Carolina at 39. Good receiver. Much rather have Aiyuk. Who else? Jordan Addison went 23 to the Vikings. That one's a little tougher. I don't know. Would you rather have Jordan Addison or Aiyuk?
I mean, Aiyuk. I mean, it's
Close.
hard for a receiver to be an All-Pro player, you know, and as
Zay
a rookie.
Flowers went to Baltimore at 22nd pick of round 1. Would you rather have Zay Flowers or Aiyuk? Probably Aiyuk.
I mean, there's no one in that class I'd rather have over Aiyuk. There's no
Quentin
one.
Johnson went 21. You'd rather have Aiyuk. Jackson Smith Enigba went 20 to Seattle. Rather have Aiyuk. So there you go. Those are the receivers that went in the first 2 rounds of the draft last year.
I don't know if you saw. Yeah,
There's a lot of highly touted guys there, but only maybe 1 or 2 would even make you even think about it.
One interesting point I did see from Albert Breer, though, he had his mailbag today, and someone asked him about the Brandon Aiyuk situation. And his take on it was that he could see them moving Brandon Aiyuk, not from any of his sources, but just because you can make the argument that of all the key players on the 49ers, Brandon Aiyuk might be the only expendable one. Just because it's like if you lose Trent Williams, you can't replace him. You lose Bosa, you can't replace him. You lose Travarius Ward, you're not replacing him with anyone. Brandon Aiyuk is they have a lot of skill players on their team. He was making the argument that they could still make the Super Bowl without Brandon Aiyuk. So
interesting. As far as wide receivers they've met with, Jacarius Caston from Southern Miss. They met with him. Cam Johnson from Northwestern. They met with him. Hayden Hatton from Idaho. They met with him. Who else?
Well, I want to ask you
Xavier Legette, Luke McCaffrey, and Ladd McConkey, and Bub Means and Jalen McMillan. They met with all those guys. Brendan Rice. They met with Brendan Rice. Brian Thomas from LSU. They met with him. Xavier Worthy. So they've met with a lot of the receivers that they could take a look at if they decided to move on from Aiyuk.